Over 2,000 F4U Corsairs were lost during World War II, mostly not to enemy fire. So why did so many pilots die in this deadly aircraft? The truth is darker than you think. Let's find out why. The F4U Corsair was built for one purpose: to give the Allies an edge over the Japanese. But it wasn't just any fighter. When it was first designed in 1938, the US Navy wanted a carrier-based aircraft that could go faster and hit harder than anything in the sky. What they got was a fighter that became the fastest piston-engine aircraft of World War II. The Corsair had a top speed of 417 miles per hour, a big improvement over other aircraft at the time. But this speed came at a price. With the powerful Pratt & Whitney engine, the Corsair needed a propeller that was over 13 feet long. The size of the prop made the aircraft difficult to land on an aircraft carrier. The Navy had a serious problem. How could they fit such a huge propeller into a carrier that had limited space? The engineers came up with a clever design: a gull wing that allowed the landing gear to be short enough for the propeller to clear the deck. But while it worked for space, this design made the Corsair very tricky to land. Carrier landings are one of the most challenging tasks in aviation. The deck is narrow, constantly moving with the ocean, and is only 150 meters long. To stop a plane, it needs to catch an arresting wire with its tailhook. But landing on a moving target this small with no room for error is hard, even for experienced pilots. For the Corsair, it was even worse. The plane's design meant that pilots couldn't see the deck at all during their approach. The cockpit was set far back, and the nose stretched forward, making it nearly impossible for pilots to judge their approach. They had to rely on landing signal officers standing on the edge of the deck to guide them. But even with these signals, many pilots still struggled. The Corsair was designed to fly fast and climb high, but these qualities didn't help with landing. This poor visibility caused many accidents. The Corsair was prone to stalling, which is when a plane loses lift and falls from the sky. But the Corsair didn't stall evenly. One wing would lose lift before the other, causing the plane to roll violently to one side. Many pilots crashed while trying to land, some falling into the sea or hitting the ship itself. Even if pilots did manage to land, the problems didn't end there. The Corsair's landing gear struts were stiff, and the plane was heavy. When it touched down, the plane often bounced back into the air, a behavior known as porpoising. This made it harder to keep the plane on the deck. If the plane came down misaligned, it could destroy its propeller or crash into other planes.
The Navy became concerned about the plane's safety, and for a while,
the Corsair was grounded from carrier duty. Despite its impressive performance in the air, the Navy decided it wasn't worth the risk for pilots. The Corsair was considered too dangerous for carrier operations, and it was sent to the Marine Corps instead, which used it for land-based operations. But this wasn't the end of the story. While the US Navy rejected the Corsair, the British took a different approach. They needed all the fighters they could get, and were willing to get creative. Instead of landing in a straight line, they figured out that the Corsair could approach the deck in a wide, curved path. This way, pilots could keep one side of the deck in view during their descent, reducing the risk of crashing. The British also made a few changes to the plane, including shortening the wings to make it fit in their smaller hangars. Thanks to these modifications, the British were able to use the Corsair on their carriers, but the US Navy still wasn't convinced. They were worried about the plane's safety and continued to ground it. Eventually, the Marine Corps saw the potential of the Corsair. They didn't need to land on carriers as they were fighting from dirt airstrips on islands. This eliminated the Corsair's landing problems. The Marines made some improvements to the plane, such as adding a stall strip on one wing to prevent it from rolling when it slowed down. With these changes, the Corsair became a force to be reckoned with. The Marines took the Corsair into combat over the Solomon Islands. The first combat missions were disastrous, though. In what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, 12 newly deployed Corsairs took off to escort B-24 bombers. They were met by over 40 Japanese fighters, and 8 American aircraft were lost, including 2 Corsairs. It was a painful start, but it was just the beginning. As the Marines continued to use the Corsair in combat, they quickly realized it had some major advantages. The Corsair could outrun the Japanese Mitsubishi Zero, a lightweight and maneuverable fighter, by over 80 miles per hour. In a dive, the Corsair could catch up to the Zero in seconds, and the Corsair's superior firepower meant it could knock out the Zero in a head-to-head fight. The Corsair's primary armament was 650 caliber machine guns, which gave it an edge over the Zero's 250 caliber machine guns and two 20mm cannons. The Corsair could also carry bombs and rockets, making it effective in ground support missions. Despite its flaws, the Corsair quickly became the most feared Allied fighter in the Pacific. The Japanese gave it the nickname Whistling Death because of the unique, high-pitched sound it made during dives. When the US Navy began to deploy the Corsair in the Pacific, it was equipped for multiple roles. In addition to its role as a fighter, it was used for close air support, ground attack, and anti-ship missions. The Corsair's ability to carry bombs and rockets made it versatile and lethal. One of its most famous roles was as a bomber escort. The Corsair's long-range capability made it an excellent companion for bombing runs, especially as the Allies began their island-hopping campaign across the Pacific. It provided critical protection for bombers, targeting Japanese airfields and supply depots. As the US advanced closer to Japan, the Corsair became indispensable. But the real turning point came during the Battle for Okinawa in 1945. The US Navy was heavily engaged with Japanese forces, and the Corsair was at the forefront of many successful missions. The aircraft's ability to engage Japanese ground forces, defend bombers, and strike enemy airfields made it a key asset in the final stages of the war. Despite its growing success, the Corsair's dark history still haunted it. The aircraft was originally feared by its own pilots because of its tendency to kill those who flew it. Many pilots had died in its early days because of landing accidents, stalling, and the aircraft's sheer difficulty to control. Even when it had proven its combat effectiveness, the Corsair's legacy as a pilot killer lingered. By the time the Corsair had earned its reputation as a highly effective aircraft, many pilots who had flown it during the early, dangerous days had already perished. The dark truth about the Corsair was that, despite its excellence in combat, it was not easy to fly, and many good pilots lost their lives before it reached its full potential. By the time the Korean War ended, the Corsair's time as a frontline fighter was over. The introduction of jet aircraft had made piston-engine fighters like the Corsair obsolete. But the aircraft's legacy lived on, as it had proven itself in one of the most difficult and dangerous wars in history. Its ability to evolve and adapt, despite its flaws, made the Corsair one of the most iconic aircraft of the 20th century. Today, the F4U Corsair is remembered not just for its role in World War II, but for its dark history. It was a plane that nearly killed its own pilots, before becoming a true hero in the skies. Its fearsome reputation, its incredible performance, and its ability to adapt to the changing tides of war made the Corsair a lasting symbol of the fight against tyranny. Despite its rough start, the Corsair's story is one of redemption. It went from being a fighter that almost no one wanted to one of the most successful and respected aircraft of World War II. But its dark legacy of pilot deaths, crashes, and struggles remains a part of its story, a reminder of the price that was paid for victory.